This video is partially made possible by Gigabyte.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another video review. Today we're going to be looking at the Cooler Master Hyper 612S CPU cooler. And this is a CPU cooler. It's quite a large cooler and it's also quite heavy. And let's have a closer look at the heatsink. Now the heatsink consists of aluminum fins and 6mm copper heat pipes. At the base of the heatsink you can find the base plate, which also is made out of copper, where all the heat pipes come together. And as you can see on top of the base plate there's also a little heatsink positioned right there. Now this is the top of the heatsink and they did a little bit of design here. As you can see they added actually two fins which are bent like this. And they're not probably doing that much because they're not that much connected to the heat pipes, but they're just detailing their design. Gotta say it finishes the heatsink quite nicely. Now they include a 120mm fan with this heatsink, and it has a black cable with a 3-pin connector. And taking this fan off, you can actually do that, replace it, or for whatever reason you might do it. It's quite easy, but it's not as easy as with the other CPU coolers from Cooler Master I recently reviewed. It's the same way of doing it, but it's harder to push these clips on top. But eventually they go off like that. And they include two more of these plastic rails, so you can install another fan for a push-pull configuration. And here's a list of specifications of the fan. Now it's not a 4-pin fan like I showed, it's a 3-pin connector fan. So the speeds of your fan, etc. won't really change depending on the temperature of your CPU. But anyway, they also include this adapter for a silent mode. So then you have differences between the fan just with its connector and the fan with the silent mode adapter. And let me point them out. So, for example, you have the fan speed, which is 1300 RPM normally, but with the silent mode connector it's 900 RPM. Then it's the airflow, for example, is 52.6 CFM normally, but with the adapter it's 36.4 CFM. And then the noise level, which is probably the most important part of this adapter. With the fan itself it's just 22.5 decibels. But with the adapter it goes down, of course, and it goes down to 16.1 decibels. Now some other things that Cooler Master includes beside the silent mode adapter here are of course some thermal paste, screws and bolts and some other rubber thingies to install the heatsink on your motherboard. Brackets for AMD and Intel, some other pair of brackets to install directly on the heatsink, the motherboard backplate, which is for Intel and AMD, so we won't have an extra one laying around after you've installed the heatsink on your motherboard. And then finally there's also this pair of bracket screws and these anti-vibration rubbers to install the other optional fan, which you could buy perhaps, for a push-pull configuration. Now we're coming to the installation here, and the CPU cooler isn't on the motherboard yet. It's actually just placed it there, but it's to check this out. I've got large heatsinks on my memory modules. I don't have lower ones, and it's touching it, and it's not on the CPU entirely. So this is a problem here. And I'm probably just gonna install one memory module in this slot here, right here then, I guess. But yeah, that's certainly something you should be aware of when buying such a large cooler. Because seriously, this is large. Alright, now I'm gonna install this. And of course, for once again, we're going to use the Zalman ZM STG1 thermal grease. I'm gonna put that on and then we'll continue. Alright, the thermal grease is on, and now we must take off this label. So let's peel it off, and you can see a very, very decently reflecting surface here. So this must have very good contact. Alright, and the brackets are on for my Intel processor, and I set the screws here in the correct position, which for me is the middle hole in the bracket. And let's put the heatsink on top of the CPU now. Now here's where it gets tricky with this specific CPU cooler, because I have to install the cooler on the motherboard, and then after that I gotta put the backplate on and screw these screws with the bolts that they include. So it's gonna be quite difficult, I think, and certainly because this is a large heatsink. So let's just hope we don't break anything, and let's try this. Alright, and I'm holding this motherboard quite weirdly. I'm holding this in a very weird position, but I have the feeling that this is the only way that I can actually screw this in like I should. Honestly, this is the most difficult installation of a heatsink that I've ever done, because of these bolts here. Certainly for a motherboard, of course, not inside a case. Sometimes you can just do it while the motherboard is inside a case, and if someone's helping you, that's also quite helpful sometimes. And I think that with this specific cooler, it's probably needed that someone helps you while installing it. Of course you can do it alone, I just did it, so it's possible, but be careful. Alright, it seems that the heatsink is on very tight, so that's okay then. Let's hope it also cools well, and I'm so sure it will if you actually have a look at the size of this thing. It might perhaps even cool passively. But yeah, I just had a great idea for the fan, as I don't have this installed in the case while testing. It doesn't really matter which way let the airflow go, so I don't have to install a fan on this side. So I'm gonna install a fan on the other side, and that's gonna work as well. It's gonna work exactly the same. Alright, and I have the feeling that I've installed this like I should, that everything's gone well, and let's now test this CPU cooler. Alright, so as you saw, the results were very good. This cooler is really good for high overclockings. Like, if I only did 4 GHz, as this is the benchmark that I do, but yeah, you can easily use this cooler for 4.5 up to 5 GHz, maybe even more. I don't know what you're planning on doing, but yeah, for big overclocks, this cooler is certainly good. Now remember, it's very big, so the cooler itself is very big, so remember that when installing it or planning on installing it, because you have to make sure that it's not going to hit your memory modules. As you saw earlier in the video, I had to turn around the fan to the other side of the heatsink, as it actually hit the modules that I had installed, as they have very high heatsinks. But now that's a minor issue, and that you can fix very easily. Now, the big issue that I actually have with this cooler is that it's not really easy to install, as it's very heavy. It's of course very large, as I said before, and it makes it difficult to install, certainly because you have to turn around the motherboard, and then you have to screw in some bolts, and it's not really simple because you have to keep the heatsink in place, and then you can install the backplate. Normally you should actually install the backplate first, and then you should be able to install the heatsink on top of the CPU after the backplate was installed. That's mostly the better way to install a heatsink for a CPU cooler, certainly for such a large cooler. But yeah, performance wise it's very good. Then design is relatively okay. I mean, it's not boring looking because they made those two aluminum fins on the top at least a little different, so it looks quite cool. So yeah, overall gotta give this cooler an awesome award. And yeah, I hope you guys stay tuned for more videos, more reviews. Subscribe to this channel if you haven't yet. Also comment and like this video. And yeah, thank you to Cooler Master for sponsoring us for this video review. And I'll see you guys in the next video.